Skylane 2247, Nowcott Tower. You are well outside your filed corridor. Skylane 2247, please respond. Skylane 2247, your transponder has gone dark. Please respond.
No, I didn't see it crash. That's the thing. It didn't crash. It just sort of unhooked itself from the sky, like someone took it off a peg. I was at the lake. I watched the whole bloody thing come down for about 40 seconds, but it never actually arrived. There's a category of disaster reserved for things that don't end. Things that don't have the decency to finish. A plane crash is, in its way, a closed loop. There's a runway you were meant to reach. You didn't reach it, the wreckage is on a hillside somewhere, and within 36 hours there are men in high-vis suits walking the grid for what's left of the black box. Tidy. Awful, but tidy. The other category, the much worse one, is the disappearance. The flight that doesn't crash and doesn't land. It just goes off the screen and stays off it. And then sometimes, decades later, the screen blinks and it's back. This is one of those. Right, hello. What you just heard was meant to set a mood for the next 30 minutes of your life. None of it's real, the transponder isn't real, the man at the lake isn't real. It is, however, doing a fairly accurate job of selling the tone of a thing that does exist, which is the new season of the survival MMO Once Human, and a piece of in-game lore that has candidly surprised me by how much I want to talk about it. The game is Once Human. The new season is called The Visional Wheel Season 4, Gravity Abyss, and the thing I'm spending the bulk of this video looking at is called the Riftwalker, a colossal mechanical, almost certainly sentient airliner that vanished from flight paths some years ago and has, in the interim, developed the rather unhelpful habit of reappearing inside pockets of broken gravity to terrorize the few survivors still living near the region called Nowcott. Which is, I think we can all agree, a sentence. Quick housekeeping before we get into it. This is a sponsored video. Once Human are the sponsored. You know the drill by now. The relevant structural thing for you to know is that the video has roughly two halves. The first half is a mockumentary investigation of the Riftwalker as a piece of lore, taken as seriously as the lore deserves. The second half is me walking you through the actual gameplay of the new season. What you do, how it plays, whether it's worth your time. You get a sense of when we're in which mode. But let's get into it. This is the Riftwalker. Let's start with the people who saw it. The first thing you need to understand about the Riftwalker is that nobody who claims to have seen it can agree on what they saw. This is, in fairness, the most consistent feature of every interesting cryptid in human history. The Mothman, the Yeti, the bloke in Loch Ness. All of them suffer from the same documentary problem, which is that the witnesses are all very certain they saw the thing and very unable to describe the thing in a way that matches any other witness. The Riftwalker is, on this metric, doing extremely well. We have an eyewitness account from a mayfly scout, a young woman, mid-20s, the kind of carefully composed survivor face that's basically a standard issue Nowcott export, who describes it as, quote, an airliner the size of a city block, but you couldn't look at it directly because your eyes kept sliding off it. Sliding off, that is an unhelpful description, useful in the sense that it tells you something is wrong with the way it exists, which is exactly the kind of detail that gets your hairs up. Useless in the sense that it tells you nothing about what the thing actually is. We have a second account from a man we'll call Alexei, who claims he was hauling salvage south of the old Rosetta perimeter when the sky, quote, leaned. His word, not metaphorical, he says the sky leaned about 15 degrees off true for somewhere between 4 and 6 minutes, and during that time he watched something the rough shape of a passenger aircraft drift overhead at the speed of, and I quote again, the way a fridge door slowly closes, which is, I think we can agree, a deeply unsettling unit of measurement to apply to a plane. There is a third account that I'm not going to read in full because the man delivering it is not in a good way. The relevant bit is this. He says he heard the in-flight cabin announcements, but he was on his porch and there was no plane visible. But he heard, clearly, the calm intercom voice of a flight attendant asking passengers to please return to their seats to the upright position, and the soft chime that goes with it. He says he has not slept properly since. Now, the natural thing to do with eyewitness accounts of impossible phenomena is to discard them. They're inherently unreliable. Memory is reconstructive. People want their lives to mean something, and a brush with a sky monster is fairly load-bearing in that regard. The problem of discarding the Riftwalker accounts in the usual way is that the eyewitnesses aren't actually the strangest thing about the phenomenon. The strangest thing is the luggage. This is the bit, by the way, that made me actually want to write this video, which I'm telling you because you don't owe me earnestness on a sponsored upload, and I owe you the courtesy of pointing out where it shows up. Across the affected zones of Nalcott, that is, the regions where the gravitational anomalies have been at their worst, survivors have been reporting with increasing frequency the appearances of suitcases. Not metaphorically, literally. Suitcases falling from the sky, plummeting out of the clouds, hitting the ground with the kind of soft, wrong impact that something falling from that height has no business making, and just lying there, closed. When the survivors open them, and they do open them, because food and ammunition are short and a sealed container falling from the sky is a salvager's whole Christmas, but what they find inside is not what should be in a suitcase. There are no shirts, no toothbrushes, no tickets, no half-read paperbacks, no charging cables, none of the small evidence of a life that was on its way somewhere. What's in the suitcase is instead raw ore. Ancient, pulsating, material the official Rosetta classifications don't have a column for. The kind of substance that, if you took it back to a research lab, would probably make several careers very interesting and several careerists very sick. And the ore inside the suitcase, the survivors are reporting, pulses in time with the gravitational disturbances. The same beat, the same rhythm, as if the contents of the cases and the breaking of the sky are part of the same nervous system. This is the part where the mockumentary frame starts to feel a bit thin, isn't it? Because the implication is unavoidable. The implication is that the suitcases are being thrown, that the cursed souls trapped aboard the Riftwalker, whatever cursed and whatever souls happen to mean there, are flinging their possessions at the earth. Not as cargo, not as bombardment, as a plea. A frantic, repeated, increasingly desperate attempt to make the people on the ground notice that they are still up there, that they are still on the plane, that the plane has been going somewhere for years and they have not been allowed to land. That is the image I want you to sit with for a second, because the rest of this is going to get into game systems and loot boxes and aerial combat and all the rest of it. And that's fine and good and worth your time, but the thing I want to actually credit Once Human for is that buried under the gameplay loop is a horror image that's properly worth the runtime. Suitcases, people you cannot see, throwing the only thing they still have at a ground they cannot reach in the hope you will look up. That's the Riftwalker. That's what they're making you fight. Anyway, carry on. So who or what is on board? The official line, and by official I mean the in-world Mayfly research files that the game very generously lets you piece together over the course of about 15 hours of side content, which is genuinely a lot of effort to spend on lore for what is technically a battle pass. The official line is that the Riftwalker started its career as a perfectly normal commercial aircraft. Filed flight path, a full passenger manifest, a scheduled departure and a scheduled arrival. The whole thing, tickets, snacks, the lot. It departed, but it never arrived. It did not crash and it didn't land. The civilian authorities of the time logged it as missing, the way you'd log anything else missing. And then over the course of the following years, as the Starfall event happened and Rosetta's monolith went off, and Stardust started rewriting what biology and physics were even allowed to do, the missing flight became one of about 1,000 similarly missing things. And nobody had the bandwidth to follow up on it. You can probably feel the real-world resonance here. There's a particular grip that lost aircraft have on the human imagination. Amelia Earhart, MH370, Flight 19 over the unnamable bit of ocean. And the reason they grip is precisely that they refuse to finish. There's no impact site, there's no debris field, there's no closure, no answers. The plane is somewhere and it is forever going to be somewhere, and there's nothing you can do about it, and there's no signal to interpret because the signal stopped. The Riftwalker is what happens if 20 years after the signal stops, the signal comes back. What the Mayfly files suggest, in scattered fragments, is that the original aircraft did not survive in any conventional sense. The wreckage of the plane was, at some point during the Starfall years, exposed to a sufficient concentration of anti-Stardust energy, which is roughly the negative pressure cousin of the Stardust that broke the world. And the combination produced what the files refer to, with admirable understatement, as a substrate event. The plane became something else. Not a ghost, because that would be too clean. Not a possession because it's too small a scale. The wreckage absorbed the anti-Stardust the way blotting paper absorbs ink, and what came out the other side was a thing that retained the shape of a plane, the memory of a plane, the function of a plane in the sense that it was always going somewhere, but has been re-substrated, rebuilt out of a material that gravity does not have the same opinions about. Which is why, when the Riftwalker appears, it doesn't appear like a plane. It appears like a fact about the sky that's just been told to stop being true. And the cursed souls inside of it, the passengers, were never let off. This is the part where I have to start explaining what you actually do in the game, which I'm going to do at speed because it's only worth it if it's quick. The new season is called the Gravity Abyss for a fairly literal reason. The Riftwalker's appearance has caused entire regions of Nalcott to start failing at gravity. Pockets of zero-G, whole tectonic strata pulled from the earth and drifting upward into the sky. Surface structures, derelict facilities, broken down comms towers, the bones of the old world, being torn loose and rising in slow, terrible silence into the clouds. What this means for you, the player, is that the geography of large parts of the map has fundamentally changed. The ground is no longer where the ground used to be. The interesting stuff is not on the ground. The interesting stuff is up there. So Once Human's response to this is to lean hard into vertical play. You're given tools to navigate low-gravity environments. You can master the actual movements of the zero-gravity zones. There's a real feel to it. It's not just a jump pad, it's a full directional change in how your character handles momentum. Or more in keeping with the spirit of survival sandboxes, you can simply build a tower. Vertical construction is now genuinely meta. You can scaffold your way up into the atmosphere, build platforms in the cloud, harvest the rare resources floating up there that are physically unreachable from the ground level. I want to give Once Human credit for this because base building games very rarely give the base building system anything really interesting to do. You build a base, the base sits there. The base is a fortress against zombies or whatever. The base is functionally a coat rack with walls. The Gravity Abyss is the first time I've seen a survival sandbox say, no, your base is actually the only way to reach the most interesting parts of the new content. Build up or don't play. The phrase the developers have been using, which I'm going to forgive on the grounds that it's earned, is impossible architecture. Players are out here building floating houses, suspended hunting blinds, multi-tier observation towers in the literal clouds. It is, in a way, one of the funnier responses to civilizational collapse I've seen in a game. The world has broken, physics is failing, your neighbor has built a 3-story cabin 900 feet in the air to watch for falling suitcases. That's the response. That is the human response. Just build up. The other thing to do up there, while we're on it, is intercept the Ravager airdrops. These are the suitcase events. The Riftwalker passes overhead. Sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. And the cargo plummets, and if you've built well, or if you've mastered your aerial movement well, you can catch it in midair, snag it before it hits the ground, crack it open, and take whatever's inside. Which is, of course, a continuation of the horror image. The plea is being intercepted before it lands. Whatever they were trying to say is being absorbed into your inventory. I don't think the game wants you to think about it that way. The Mayfly faction, that's the group you normally belong to, the one trying to broker a third way between the people who want to serve Rosetta forever and the people who want to welcome the Great Ones with open arms, has been involved with the Riftwalker for longer than most of the survivors realize. The relevant name here is Mitsuko. If you played any of the previous Once Human seasons, you'll know her. If you haven't, the short version is that she's one of the Mayfly's senior figures, and she has, depending on which lore files you found, either a personal or a professional history with the original plane crash. The files don't fully commit on this, but I think that's deliberate. I think the lore is being held loose on purpose. What the lore does commit on is what she did about it. Mitsuko somehow, and somehow is doing a great deal of work in that sentence, managed to make contact with the entity inside the Riftwalker. Not destroy it, not contain it, contact it, negotiate with it, persuade the thing made of anti-Stardust energy and dead passengers to settle into a state the files call, with extreme delicacy, neutral. The Riftwalker is, in current canon, technically pacified. It is not actively hostile to all life. It is instead in something resembling a holding pattern. It still appears in the gravity-broken zones, it still releases the luggage, it still rearranges the sky when it shows up, but it does not generally attempt to consume the people it encounters anymore. This is, I think, the most once human possible outcome for an entity of this scale. Not killed, not exercised, talked to. A monstrous thing the size of a building has been essentially persuaded. Which doesn't make the monster less, it makes the monster something you have to live with, and the cursed souls inside are still trying to be heard. The boss fight, when it comes, is not a boss fight in the sense of, we have to stop this thing. It's a boss fight in the sense of, the pacification is unstable, the entity is partially breaching containment, and we need to push it back into the holding pattern before the gravity in this zone collapses entirely. It's harm reduction, which for survival MMO is a fairly grown-up framing. The encounter itself takes place on what the game calls aerial platforms, drifting fragments of the old world, ripped loose by the gravity collapse, suspended at varying altitudes in and around the cloud layer. You fight on these, between these, from these. The whole arena is in motion. It is, on a pure level of spectacle, the best looking thing Once Human's built. The Riftwalker emerges from the cloud bank slowly, not aggressively, slowly, the way something the size of an apartment block has to move. And the camera, which has been holding tight on your character throughout, pulls back to remind you of the scale. And the scale is genuinely silly. You are an ant on a flying lily pad, and the thing rising into view is a flying graveyard. I'm not going to ruin the fight mechanics because, candidly, half the point of a boss like this is the discovery curve. Multi-stage phase changes that involve the platforms themselves shifting position. Combat that requires you to think vertically in a way most MMOs simply do not ask you to. It works, it's good, it's the kind of fight that justifies the season. What I will say is that the entire encounter is scored beautifully. Once Human's audio team has been quietly one of the best things about the game since the launch, and the Riftwalker theme is, in the genre of music for finding something that shouldn't exist, properly considered. Strings, distorted intercom chimes, voices in the lower mix that you can almost but not quite make out the words of. There's no jump scare in this fight because there doesn't need to be. Right, the gacha bit. Let's do the gacha bit. Once Human, like every live service game eventually does, has identified that there is a deeply load-bearing dopamine loop available to anyone willing to bolt a loot box onto their content cycle. They've called this one the Abyssal Core Gambit. It is, in the game's own framing, a stone gambling mechanic. I have not made up that phrase. Stone gambling, that is what they call it. The way it works is the resources you collect from the Riftwalker encounter, from the Ravager airdrops, from the floating ore floating in the broken sky, can be decomposed back down at your base into Abyssal Cores. The Abyssal Cores are, mechanically, gacha rolls. You crack one open and you get something. The something might be very good, the something might be functionally useless. The something is, by design, randomized within a defined drop pool. And look, I'm contractually obliged to mention this is in the game. I'm not contractually obliged to pretend it's elegant. It's a loot box loop with a slightly more interesting cosmetic coat of paint than usual. The cosmetic coat of paint is, to its credit, genuinely interesting. You are gambling with the bones of a sky monster, which is a vibe, but mechanically, it is what it is. What I will give it credit for is that the cores are entirely earned in-game. There's no real money pressure on the Abyssal Core loop specifically. You play, you gather, you decompose, you roll. If you enjoy the dopamine of the unbox, you've got a near infinite supply of it. If you don't, you can ignore the system entirely and the content gates open up at the normal rate. I've enjoyed it more than I expected to. I've enjoyed it less than the boss fight, and take that for what it's worth. Right, we're nearly done, but I want to come back to the suitcases. I said earlier that the image of the cursed souls hurling their luggage at the ground was the thing that made me actually want to write this video. That hasn't changed in the writing of it. It is, of all the things Once Human has built into the season, the one I keep thinking about when I close the door. There is a tendency in cosmic horror, and Once Human is, whatever else it is, very clearly working in that tradition, to render the unknowable as malevolent. The thing in the sky doesn't care about you, the thing in the sky wants to eat you. The thing in the sky exists in a moral register so far above yours that you might as well be a barnacle. That's the standard register, that's what we know how to write. But the Riftwalker isn't really doing that, it's kind of doing the opposite. The Riftwalker is, by every available reading of the evidence, trying to talk to you. The luggage isn't ordnance, it isn't payload, it's a message sent at the only frequency the thing on the plane has left. Physical objects dropped through gravity, hoping someone on the ground notices the rhythm of them and works out that there are still people up there. What survives the starfall in the Once Human universe isn't always the people themselves. Sometimes it's just the want to be heard. The Riftwalker is fundamentally the want to be heard of a couple of hundred passengers who got onto a plane decades ago and have not yet been allowed to land. And the response of the survivors on the ground, your response in the game, is, mostly, to harvest the suitcases for raw materials, decompose them, roll the cores, and build your tower higher. I don't think the game is judging you for that. I think the game knows that's the only viable response to a sky full of dead voices. You can't answer the plane, but you can use the plane. But it's worth, I think, sitting with the fact that the only reason the plane is hurling its luggage at the ground in the first place is that nobody up there has stopped throwing yet. The plea has been ongoing. The plea is, in the literal mechanics of the season, ongoing right now every time you log in. And then we kill the boss anyway, as you do. Right, sponsored bit, stand by. Once Human is a free-to-play, post-apocalyptic, multiplayer open-world survival game where, among other things, you can fight and contain giant monsters. It's one of the most played games on Steam, which is the kind of stats I am professionally obliged to repeat, but which is also, for what it's worth, true. The Visional Wheel Season 4 Gravity Abyss season is live now. The Riftwalker is in it, and the suitcases are falling out of the sky as we speak. If anything I've described in the last 20 minutes has nudged you in the direction of wanting to play it, the gravity stuff, the impossible architecture, the boss fight, the deeply unwell airliner that won't stop trying to communicate, the link to download is in the description and pinned in the top comment. Steam and mobile, free to start. You don't have to spend anything to find out whether the loop works for you. Also, and this one's not contractually obliged, this one's me actually being curious, if you do play the season, I want to know what you make of the Riftwalker. Specifically the luggage. Specifically whether you found it as horrible as I did, or whether I'm projecting and it's actually fine and I need to go outside. Probably that one. Leave a comment, tell me what you saw up there. Tell me whether you think the pacification holds. I read the comments, genuinely. I'll read yours. Alright, that'll do it for this one. Cheers to Once Human for letting me write this the way I wanted to. Cheers to you for sticking with me through 30 minutes of, well, 20, of fake documentary, real lore, and an extended sponsored segment about gambling with Skyle. You're the best audience on the planet, and I will, in the standard tradition, refuse to elaborate on what I mean by that. Until then, keep an eye on the sky, don't open any suitcases that don't belong to you. Alright, script over. I can talk normally now. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. I know I've been doing a lot of, sponsored stuff, but man's gotta eat, and there's a big boy video coming up soon. Big. I'm talking, it's probably gonna be like 4 hours, so, I've been, editors aren't gonna pay themselves. But yes, no, thank you all so much for the support, and as always, thank you so much to the channel members and the Patreons, that of course being Flapjack, 8th Heretic, Vested Voice, Pewter Hailstorm, Rasulki Ryler, Myhara Project, Idenios, Kiofer, Andrew Sherman, Shaddix the Great, Norica, Sign Up King 5000, Sisyphus, Reese Lunn, Ellie Kitty, Ice Bear Ray, Adrian Lynch, Vibe Cato, Bearport, The Radiant Opera, Sign Up King, Crit Croc, Ash Crowing, and Aroxano. Thank you all so much for the support. It truly means the world, and if you want your name read out, you know what to do. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Bye bye.